and they were playing and testing together at the local card shop in Bellevue, Washington. So not really going to be very many surprises here. But what do you think in this particular matchup, since they're basically doing the same thing? This is pretty close to a mirror. I wouldn't be surprised card for card. How do you get an edge?
So there's going to be, the most important thing is going to be scrying.
Okay.
Both players are going to have lots and lots of options over the course of the game of what cards to scry and which card, things like which land to keep with Seder Wayfinder, what mode to use with Hero's Downfall or Utter End, like which target to choose. And it's going to be an awful lot of just trying to sculpt a game plan. Are you building towards whip? Are you trying to beat down with rhinos? Are you just trying to get card advantage with Courser of Krufix? There's a lot of different ways that they're going to be able to play it, and all the little decisions are going to be influenced by what cards they see from their opponent with Thoughtseize and what cards of their own they draw.
Well, here is a Thoughtseize from Thompson. There's not a lot of Blossoms, a Doomwake Giant, along with a Seder Wayfinder over there. Reclamation Sage and a couple of lands that you can't see that are off the screen. As far as Kastel, he played a Seder Wayfinder, found a Forest, so there's a Forest in his grip, and then there's a Sansep Citadel and a Siege Rhino in the graveyard. Gerry's going to play a Sansep Citadel and shortcut a little bit here, but we'll figure out what card he wants to take with this Thoughtseize, and it looks like he's going to go with Reclamation Sage.
Reclamation Sage, so good in this matchup as it not only hits Courser of Krufix, but Whip of Erebos, and even Doomwake Giant.
We're getting to a world where this main deck kind of enchantment hate might be the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing this more and more, and here, 2 main deck Reclamation Sages with more enchantment removal in the sideboard.
It's a second Seder Wayfinder. It's going to turn over 4 lands, a Forest, a Windswept Heath, and 2 copies of Llanowar Waste, so Kastel has the option to choose basically whatever he'd like. Looks like he may be going with the fetch land here. So one thing I realized, and I actually played this deck last weekend at Portland, and I know you have some experience playing these Courser decks, is the fetch lands, you don't really sacrifice them very much if you don't have to because of the Courser interaction.
Yeah, there's so good of an interaction with Courser of Krufix where it effectively gives you like a free scry of sorts, because you can wait until there's a card on top that you don't want. You can shuffle it away, and it's not even just a random loot. Sometimes it gives you an extra card even beyond that, because if the top card of your deck is not a land and you already had a Windswept Heath in play, you can sacrifice it, get another look, and if there's a land on top, now it's like you draw another card even beyond that. So it can be very, very powerful to wait.
Here's Nylon of Blossoms. You see Kastel using his Windswept Heath, tapping for black mana via Orboard. So does not want to sacrifice that, though he doesn't have a Courser yet. Thompson's draw was a Caves of Koilos, puts Llanowar Waste into play off of the Courser. He'll gain a life there, goes up to 18. Top card of the deck now is a Forest. So he's found some lands.
Oh yeah. Plus, additionally, when you have the Courser in play, you gain an extra life from activating the Windswept Heath. So often the 1 life that you'll gain someday from waiting until you have a Courser is worth more than just cracking now to try to thin your deck. You don't even necessarily want to thin your deck because you want to have Courser hit more.
Reclamation Sage is going to jump in front of a Seder Wayfinder. You saw Reclamation Sage come down and take care of that Eidolon of Blossoms. So it's a Courser versus Wayfinder standoff right now. Kastel's going to play a Sansep Citadel before passing the turn back, but there's nothing short about these games. We're going to get to those 6, 7, 8 mana spells, Whip plus activate in the same turn. Hornet Queens are going to be coming down sooner rather than later, as you see one on top of Gerry Thompson's deck.
Yeah, that's part of what the Abzan Reanimator deck here is trying to do, is go over the top of some of the other Whip decks by having access to so many Doomwake Giants. As we see, Gerry and Kastel each have the full 4 Doomwake Giants, trying to get Hornet Queen superiority.
It's a Sylvan Caryatid. Kastel's actually going to sacrifice his Windswept Heath now, so wants to get a land out of his deck. We'll see if he searches for a Plains or a Forest, and it will be a Plains. He's got 5 lands in play, Thompson as well, but Thompson has a bit of a mana advantage here due to the Caryatid. That'll be an Utter End. It's going to take care of the Courser of Krufix. Now, the big question is, a card like Utter End, a card like Hero's Downfall, you mentioned how they have different modes. Are you supposed to save those spells? Are you supposed to try to use them early, maybe push a tempo advantage? Kind of tough to say. It doesn't seem like the best use of Utter End that turn, but maybe it's the best he can do right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how he wants to play this game out. It's possible here he's thinking, well, Gerry already has 6 land. I don't want Gerry to have, an earlier look at getting a 7th land to cast that Hornet Queen. He also might just be so flush with removal spells that he just wants to get some kind of value out of them.
Hornet Queen is the draw there for Thompson. And now here is the B. Now, we know that Kastel does have a copy of Doomwake Giant in his hand. As you mentioned, both players do have 4 of them in the deck. Courser of Krufix, the top card. This
looks like a Doomway Giant.
There's a Windswept Teeth. That'll come into play. Trigger the Courser. Gain a life. Wayfinder's going to come in, which is a safe attack because Hornet Queen is a 1/1 right now due to Doomway Giant, so the trade's going to happen there. But perhaps Gerry would rather have that in his graveyard. Draws the Temple of Malady for the turn. Looks like he does have a Whip of Erebos hiding out over there.
Yeah, and he does have enough mana now if he plays an untapped land. Question is that where he wants to start? He decides no.
Going to go with Temple of Malady, top card to the bottom. And just passing the turn back. Interesting sequence here. Whip of Erebos, the top card here for Kastel. It's time to attack. Carriada's going to block there. Doomway Giant's going to come through.
He knows that Kastel has an utter end. So if he plays the whip now, it'll be removed from the game. And even if he gets to use the Hornet Queen one time, that Doomway Giant sitting in play would undo all the work that the Queen has done.
So you like the waiting?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Part of it is that I think that Gerry has options at whipping the Reclamation Sage to get rid of the Doomway Giant, or potentially drawing a removal spell. I think that Gerry realizes he's way behind, and he can't afford to just throw everything away and just hope that Kastel doesn't have a Doomway Giant.
7 lands into play for Thompson. He does have an untapped land in his hand available on a forest, so he still has the ability to play and activate with variables. Black mana is not a concern, as Kastel does have an Urborg on his side of the table.
And he knows Kastel has a Whip of Erebos, which means that the Doomway Giant for sure has a trigger coming.
So what I find interesting about this sort of matchup, you know, that revolves around Hornet Queen, Doomway Giant, and with Erebos to a maybe a lesser extent, but kind of the game of chicken where is Gerry supposed to move in and get the activation from whip now? Is he supposed to wait? If he's supposed to whip, what's he supposed to whip back? I think that's really hard, I think, as far as decisions are concerned to figure out, because he's got the whip and the mana to activate, but he refuses to play it. He's just going to play Carry At It again and pass the turn.
Yeah, I think he's hoping that Kastel's going to play that Whip of Erebos that he has, and then Gerry will whip back a Reclamation Sage just to destroy the whip. But what Gerry really needs to do is find a removal spell.
Now there's a Hornet Queen on top of Chad's deck.
And this is showing the power of Courser of Prufix, giving you a little bit of extra looks to try to find your action.
So what Kastel wants to do here, he's tapping 4 mana now. Maybe considered a Whip of Erebos. Looks like he's going to play the land first, so that'll trigger Courser. He'll gain a little bit of life. Now there's a whip.
And this is smart. If he would have played the whip first, if he plays another land, the Courser would cause there to be life gain triggers, and then Gerry could utter end.
Because you can only use whip as a sorcery. So that life gain trigger would be on the stack. Very true. As now here's a whip activation. We'll see what he's targeting. Does have Eidolon down there in the graveyard. Reclamation Sage doesn't have a target at this point. There's also a Siege Rhino down there too. So there are a lot of healthy targets in the graveyard there for Kastel.
Yeah, he's definitely putting a lot of pressure on Gerry at this point. Even when Gerry whips back the Reclamation Sage, he's going to be way, way, way behind. At this point, his life total is super low, and he's facing a lot of big threats.
Yeah, Rhino's going to come in. Kastel's going to gain a little life. Thompson's going to lose some, so he's down to 11. Damage going to come across 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I wonder how he goes about getting back into this one.
Well, he can't even rely on the Hornet Queen at this point. You said there's an Eidolon of Blossoms in the graveyard?
Yep.
Yeah, which means that the Doomway Giant has a trigger at will if Gerry doesn't get rid of the whip.
So you see the attack, you see the blocks. Siege Rhino's going to be exiled now. So there that goes after dealing some damage. Kastel's, of course, going to gain some life since he has Erebos in play. So it's 34-3. Doomway Giant the draw here for Thompson. Is that what he was looking for?
The nice thing about Doomway Giant here is that he can play a whip and a Doomway Giant, and at least he could try to block the board. But he packs it in. He knows that Kastel's going to see the graveyard interactions.
Chad Kastel does win game number 1 here over Gerry Thompson in the Abzan Reanimator Mirror, where we're going to go to the sideboards, and I think we're going to see a lot of the same. But we will start on Thompson's side. He's got 2 Ajani, Mentor of Heroes, 2 Glare of Heresy, 2 Eidolon of Blossoms, a Temple of Silence, a Reclamation Sage, a Farika, God of Affliction, 2 Bioblights, 3 John and Sorrows, and a Thoughtseize. What do we like here for this mirror match, and why?
Well, the most important things are Reclamation Sage. As we saw, both players have tons of enchantments. So getting a little bit of a leg up in the Whip of Erebos or Doomway Giant battles is important. Ajani Mentor of Heroes is nice because it's a source of card advantage that doesn't just get destroyed by most of the removal. Eidolon of Blossoms can help win a little bit of an attrition war because it feels like both players are likely to try to be a little bit bigger than the other. And then finally, depending on how he wants to play it, he may want to board in a Temple of Silence, trimming some of the Sylvan Caryatids, which are not at their best in this attrition-y battle.
Now, the only difference between the sideboards is Thompson has a Temple of Silence where Kastel has a Silence the Believers. So I imagine most of those things, what you said, line up appropriately. But how do you feel about Silence in this matchup?
Silence the Believers, I think that it's worthwhile. It's not overwhelming. It's not overwhelmingly strong, but I think it's worth the space because you're often going to be able to exile a Siege Rhino or a Doomwake Giant where it can't even get whipped back. But when the game goes long, there are actually going to be reasonable chances of hitting multiple creatures. Like that game, if Gerry had ever had access to a Silence the Believers, which obviously he doesn't have in his list, but if he had access to one, he actually could have mounted quite a bit of a comeback.
That card feel underplayed to you? I know it was a huge card in the Block Pro Tour.
Yeah.
And that's a tournament that you won. I know you had a lot of Silence Believers in your deck, and it seemed like a pretty potent card. Yeah, it seemed like a pretty potent card for the weekend.
Yeah, it's a great card. I think the single biggest reason why there's so much less Silence Believers now than there used to be is the abundance of other good options.
Okay.
Murderous Cut is just so much more mana efficient. Utter End has a very similar role, but is much more versatile, being able to hit planeswalkers and enchantments like Whip of Erebos, which I think has proven very, very important. And then some of the value of Silence the Believers came from disrupting Bestow, which is not very popular anymore. And I think some of the value of Silence the Believers came from how reliably in that format the game would be up in the air when you have 7 or 10 mana. And this format is a little bit stronger, and there's more aggressive of decks, like things that are making big impacts on the game at an earlier point, but there's also the people who are going large are going so much bigger that one extra removal spell, one extra exile is not necessarily going to swing things as much as, for instance, like a Hornet Queen does.
These players are shuffling up for game number 2, and they're happy with the configurations. But one thing I do want to touch on very quickly as well, you mentioned boarding out Sylvan Caryatid in this sort of matchup. Some players at home might not be used to doing that. Sylvan Caryatid is kind of a mainstay in these green decks. We think of those decks with Courser Caryatid and X. So some people might not think to sideboard that out. Why is that a good idea in these green matchups?
So in some of the, and it's mostly about the black removal spells, but in a lot of the matchups that involve lots of black removal spells on both sides, trimming the number of Sylvan Caryatids can be a useful technique because you don't want to end up flooding out. You don't want to just sit there with tons and tons of mana, and the Caryatid doesn't. It slows you down in a way that that land don't, because of Courser of Kruphix. If the top card of your deck is a Sylvan Caryatid, you are not drawing any action next turn, but you're also not getting extra mana this turn. Additionally, when you both just use black removal spells and you're on each other's key threats, you can often obliterate each other's resources and both have very little left over. And if one person has a Sylvan Caryatid left over and the other person has a threat, the person with the threat ends up with a big advantage.
So you just want to have a higher threat density, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
A forest here for Thompson, as both players are going to keep their 7. Sansep Citadel here for Kastel.
Now, it's more important in the Abzan mid-range matchups. The Reanimator matchups, the speed is still quite valuable, but I would expect both players to be interested in trimming them.
Satyr Wayfinder will turn over at least one Sylvan Caryatid, along with another Satyr Wayfinder, a Doomwake Giant, and an Eidolon of Blossoms. So we're going to head back Kastel's way. He's got another Sansep Citadel and just going to pass the turn back. Hero's Downfall, the draw. An attack here for 1 is going to put Kastel down to 19. The follow-up is a Courser. Top card is a Courser here for Thompson, so we'll head back Chad's way. He'll untap that single tri-land and take a draw. You see he does have a Windswept Heath, in the grip.
A lot of people don't realize when you Satyr Wayfinder in these decks, if you don't know your top card because of like scrying or coursering, in general, you only have around an 88-89% chance of hitting a land.
Okay.
So you have to be prepared for that 1 in 9 shot of it just falling apart.
Which just happened right there, and turned over some pretty important cards, honestly. There's a Courser there for Kastel. Thompson, such a nice guy, he'll turn over the top card. It's a Courser for Chad as well. Windswept Heath is going to come into play, trigger the Courser. Take a look at the top card. It's a copy of Utter End. Going to sacrifice that Windswept Heath, Will Thompson, so he's going to let that Utter End go. We'll see if that comes back to hurt him at all, as he does dig a land out of his deck. Looks like he may be searching for the plains, and he is.
Yeah, I think he just wants to get that Eidolon of Blossoms down there and keep his snowballing going. His only alternative was to play a second Courser, but the second Courser is a little redundant.
So we'll see what the top card of his deck here is in just a moment, as he does have Courser in play.
Additionally, playing the Courser after the Eidolon has the potential of drawing you an extra card, keeping the Constellation triggers going.
It's a Satyr Wayfinder. That'll be his draw next turn. There is Eidolon of Blossoms. Well, actually, that'll be his draw now, so his draw next turn will be Utter End. So, hey, there you go.
Hey.
Everything works out great. Eidolon of Blossoms, the top card here for Kastel. These guys are playing 74 of the 75 for Chad. It's no fourth land.
Wow, that's going to be brutal. If he doesn't have a land on top of his deck, the Eidolon of Blossoms won't even get to come out and try to catch up some of this lost ground.
Utter End the draw. Courser of Grufix, the top card of the deck. You see, Thompson does have a copy of Windswept Heath in his hand, so he can sacrifice that and shuffle away the Courser if he'd like.
He also has the option of just playing a Courser here, getting a fresh look at the top of his deck.
It looks like what he's going to go with, Trigger. That's an enchantment for the Eidolon. Top card now is a copy of Sylvan Caryatid. So Gerry's left in at least 2 of those. He'll sacrifice away the Caryatid, search up a land out of his deck. You have to imagine a forest is coming now. There that is. He'll trigger 2 Coursers, so up to 24 he goes, and we'll see what the top card of his deck is yet again. It's these small advantages that these green decks do a really nice job of building between Eidolon and Courser.
Yeah, the post-sideboard games are so grindy anyway. The card advantage from Courser and Eidolon can really add up.
Windswept Heath is the top card. Satyr Wayfinder will be cast, so Heath.
And a big part of it is the manipulation. The fact that Gerry has so many ways to reset the top of his library, he really takes advantage of the information that the Courser is providing.
Yeah, Courser's kind of interesting to me because, you're taking advantage of the information that you receive, but you're also, in theory, giving away information to your opponent because they get to see basically every card that you draw. But, it feels as though it's probably more important for the player who's actually doing all of the coursing.
Yeah, the person who has the ability to manipulate it often can take advantage of the information even more. It's a common play. People love letting you draw your card for the turn before they kill your Courser because they think that the information is worth so much to them.
Mm-hmm.
But often, very, very often, that's actually a slightly weak play because the person who has the Courser you're giving information to, they get to decide whether or not to play their Scry land this turn, whether or not to play their fetch land, whether or not to just go ahead and play a Courser versus something else. So I think that far, far too often people are quick to give information to their opponent thinking that the information is worth enough to themselves.
Sure. That's really interesting. I've never actually thought about it that way. Here's another Courser. Eidolon's going to draw that card.
Remember, whatever card your opponent has, there's nothing you can do about it, then how much is knowing now? I mean, sometimes it is worthwhile, but they have so many ways that they can actually capitalize on that information. So
I suppose probably more ways than you can capitalize on that.
Right, so you want to make sure that you're at least asking yourself, is the information worth more to them or you? If they have no cards in their hand, the information is generally going to be worth more to you because there's nothing they can do to capitalize on it. And if you thought seize them, you can know. But against an opponent who just has lots of cards in hand and you don't know what they are, you got to be real careful before giving them that extra info.
Top card of the deck here for Thompson is a Forest. He's thought a little while, but he is going to play that instead of maybe the Sandstep Citadel that's in his hand. He'll gain 3 life, and now he's going to play a copy of Farika, God of Affliction. That's an enchantment. That'll draw a card. Caryatid is the draw. Land of Oasis on top. And this card does play a pretty big role in this matchup, as these decks have Whip, but also right now it's a 5/5 indestructible creature, and we can't forget about the fact that it makes enchantment creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a massive source of card advantage. There's very little chance that Chad is going to be able to come back here. The first thing he needs to do is get that Farika off the table ASAP, but without a 4th land, he's not even meaningfully interacting with Gerry.
Thoughtseize is going to show you Hero's Downfall, Whip of Erebos, Utter End, a Sylvan Caryatid, along with the Windswept Heath and a Sandstep Citadel. Most of these cards Kastel did know about, but now he knows about them all, along with the top card of Thompson's deck, which is a Land of Waste. Actually, this question now. Thoughtseize, a card I know you like a lot, knobs on mid-range. I think of Jund in Modern, how you would board that card out quite a bit. Players basically feeling that, the first turns of the game, sure, you can maybe fire off some discard spells, but you don't really want to cascade into that with Bloodbraid Elf, and, the shelf life on that card kind of goes away a little bit. How do you feel about it in this matchup where it's going to go long anyway, and players might get to the point where they have empty hands?
I still think it's just a fantastic card. The key cards in this matchup are so strong compared to the other cards. The ability to look at your opponent's hand, grab one of the few cards that generates a large advantage, like Farika or Eidolon of Blossoms, That alone is worth the price of admission, but even beyond that, getting to know what your opponent's hand looks like so that you can sculpt your game plan around it, very, very important.
Thompson going to remove Sylvan Caryatid via Farika, make a 1/1 enchantment creature. He draws an Utter End off of that, thanks to the Eidolon of Blossoms. So this is nice interaction in this deck. You're able to build a little small card drawing engine, or you can trigger Doomwake Giant multiple times in one turn. Farika, not a card you're going to play a lot of, but it does have a pretty large effect on the game.
Yeah, and Gerry's got a lot of ways to dig to it. He's got a lot of ways to reset the top of his library, looking for it, and a lot of ways to take advantage of it if and when he eventually finds it.
And now it's attacking. And of course, that thing is indestructible, so Kastel is not able to find a land again. He drew an Utter End for the turn. Siege Rhino's on top of his deck. This is his own Farika. You do a devotion check of 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. The requirement has been met, but Thompson has an Utter End, I believe, for that card. He's going to start by making an enchantment creature draw the Siege Rhino. Johnny is the draw for the turn. Llanowar Waste is now on top of the deck. Trigger Courser 3 times. This is a runaway.
Oh yeah, I mean, Chad's still stuck on 3 land.
Gerry's deck is doing everything it needs to do right now.
But Chad, with a 1-game lead, has a game to give. And here he's mostly just watching, studying, seeing if Gerry does anything different than he did, gaining information for game 3.
There's Utter End to take care of that. Here's Downfall, clear that away. It looks like he's trying to get stuff out of the way and start doing this, and that's exactly what he's going to do. Gerry Thompson going to win game number 2 here against Chad Kastel. They're headed to a third and final one here in the Abzan Reanimator Mirror. My advice to Chad would be to draw some lands.
Yeah.
So
you probably want it to be a well-balanced approach, though. I think you got to be real careful. I'm picturing, Genie, you rubbing the lamp, you asked to draw some lands. Next thing you know, you're 14 land deep.
Maybe you've asked for too many. How do we feel about Eidolon of Blossoms right now? Not just in this deck, but kind of in general in the format. Pretty good card right now, or?
Yeah. Eidolon of Blossoms, first of all, it's a card that people enjoy playing because, it's fun to draw all these extra cards. But in particular right now, it's a good time for Eidolon of Blossoms because it's very good against grindy removal-based decks. If the game goes long, Eidolon of Blossoms can draw you tons of cards and just take over the game like we saw that game. But even if your opponent removes it, you end up ahead of them because most of the things that you could play, if your opponent plays a removal spell, you're no better off. With Eidolon of Blossoms, you're getting a 2-for-1, and that's the floor, And Eidolon of Blossoms in general, its weakest moments are against people with ways to gain massive board advantage with like sweepers, like End Hostilities or Perilous Vault, something like that, or a hyper-aggressive deck that is too fast for the Eidolon of Blossoms to really give you the advantage you need. But right now, we're seeing an awful lot of grindy black removal-based decks and green decks that try to go reasonably big, reasonably slowly, and that's where Eidolon of Blossoms shines.
Yeah, you can see there's one here in each of these players' deck lists, and they have more in their sideboard. We have seen some builds of this deck play none of them. We have seen, black-green Constellation decks play 4 of them. This is, of course, has a splash of white in it. We've seen the Sultai kind of Reanimator Whip deck play them at times as well. So it kind of comes and goes in the format, but if we are in this kind of grindy place, this might be an all-star in those sort of matchups.
Both players looking to come out with just kind of a good mix of cards. I think I think the ideal hand here is a Thoughtseize, 3 land across the different colors, and maybe a Courser of Krufix. Maybe even like turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Satyr Wayfinder, turn 3 Courser of Krufix. Just advancing the game each turn, because in the early turns you want to just try to get something going, but then once you are coursering, they're going to be looking for big sources of card advantage, whether it's a Johnny or Eidolon of Blossoms or even Doomwake Giant at times.
Now, there's a lot of back and forth in this matchup. Farika seems to play a huge role. Eidolon in the mid-game, Courser in the mid-game seems to play a huge role. Players only have 2 copies of Hornet Queen in their deck this weekend, where we've seen players play 3 or 4 copies of that card. So lesser impact on that one this particular weekend, but not too surprising given that, they both have 4 copies of Doomwake Giant. I think a lot of people have Doomwake Giants this weekend.
Yeah, Hornet Queen has become so popular. It's becoming harder and harder to not play Doomwake Giant in your Abzan decks.
No one wants to lose to just play a Hornet Queen anymore, and there are definitely a lot of ways to get around that. Doomwake Giant may be the best way. Looks like Thompson has found a Thoughtseize in his hand, among other things. There's also a Caryatid there. You see a Doomwake and a Johnny. Kastel, we don't have a great look at his grip. Looks like he might be keeping, and he is, so Thompson's going to send his hand back. Not happy with the 7 he found.
Now, he did have a Llanowar Waste and a Sylvan Caryatid. That Sylvan Caryatid was a Temple of Silence.
Maybe a keep?
Maybe a keep.
All right, probably.
Temple of Silence and 6 anything is a snap keep.
Probably a keep, probably a keep.
How is it even possible to mulligan any hand with any amount of temples in it?
It's very tough.
1 or more. Because 1 or more temples. 0 is an amount of temples. But
That's true, that's true.
But, I mean, I don't care if your hand is 7 temples. If your hand is literally 7 temples, that's great.
Snap it off.
That's about, yeah. That's like, first of all, you have no mana problems.
True.
And second of all, it's basically Demonic Tutor every turn.
Remember there was a point in time when the temples were spoiled and everyone thought, these aren't even good. Why are these rare?
Well,
these aren't
certainly
even
not
good.
everybody, because some of us played 12 temples day 1. But
these cards stick. These should be uncommon. These cards aren't even good.
yeah,
Maybe some of the best lands of all time.
People don't appreciate library manipulation as much as they should.
There is a temple right now. It does a nice job of undoing a mulligan too, I imagine. Gonna leave that card on top. Kastel with a Windswept Teeth. He's just gonna pass the turn back, so nothing doing on these first turns of the game. Thompson with the Sylvan Caryatid. He will pass the turn back, looking to take the mana advantage. Does Chad have a third land? He's very slow to play something here. There is a third land. No Courser either. Now it makes you wonder what he kept. With no play on the initial turns of the game, here's a Courser of Kruphix. That's a Hero's Downfall on top of the deck. Does Thompson have a land? He does. It's a Windswept Teeth. Trigger the Courser up to 21. And
Kastel debating whether or not to sacrifice the Windswept Heath.
yeah, I thought maybe he might have a card like Hero's Downfall, but he's not going to play that either.
Well, I
Now
imagine
I'm dying to know.
I imagine at this point we're going to start seeing one big play from Kastel a turn, as his hand must have been full of great 4-drops.
Rhinos, Eidolons, Whips, something like that. All right, he's going to sacrifice the Windswept Teeth. He's down to 19. There's a basic forest. So he's without white mana at the moment.
He has another Windswept Heath in hand, though, so he has the ability to switch gears. And from Caves of Koilos, it looks like he has even more white mana available to him.
There's Siege Rhino. That's going to come in. It's going to gain him some life back.
Opting to lead with the Caves of Koilos for white mana instead of the Windswept Heath, possibly saving the Windswept Heath in hand for a Courser of Kruphix to come.
Hero's Downfall, the draw for Thompson. You see the forest in his hand. He also has a copy of Murderous Cut.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great draw for Thompson. He's got a mix of everything. He's got both Hero's Downfall and Murderous Cut to neutralize Kastel's first plays. He's got a great mix of mana. He's got Courser of Kruphix giving him an advantage with Whip of Erebos coming. And Kastel's lands, 3 of them do damage to him. So Kastel, while still at 20, is going to have his life total start to drop a little quicker than would normally be the case.
Wayfinder's going to come down. Whip of Erebos, Eidolon of Blossoms, Reclamation Sage, and Satyr Wayfinder, are the cards that Thompson's turned over. Murderous Cut's on top of his deck now.
Thompson opting to ditch the Whip of Erebos to fill his graveyard for Murderous Cut to save him some mana.
Gerry still has not played a land yet this turn.
He was definitely hoping to hit a land off of the Satyr Wayfinder or the top of his library, but at least he has another one in his hand, just chilling.
Gonna sacrifice away the Windswept Teeth. It looks like he's eyeing up a forest, though he does have a Plains in his deck to search for, and now he might be considering that as he does consult his hand. There is the Plains. So that'll, of course, trigger the Courser, so he will stay at that same 18. We'll see what the top card of his deck is here in a minute. As he has not played a land just yet for the turn. And to Temple.
Gerry doing the maximum amount of library manipulation to give him extra looks from his Courser.
Llanowar Wastes the top card now for the Scry. That's going to be the bottom card. Top card is now going to be a Sansep Citadel. Follow that up with a Murderous Cut. He'll delve away some of that graveyard, leave Eidolon and Reclamation Sage down there, and now get in for 2. Kastel's going to go down to 18. Pretty good turn there for Thompson as far as manipulation and just maximizing everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We'll go back
Gerry
Kastel's
playing very technically proficient, just trying to give himself the maximum amount of little edges possible.
Windswept Teeth is land number 5 here for Chad.
Chad having difficulty just getting anything going.
Yeah, just passes. Horrifying. That's all his turn is. Sansep Citadel's the draw. Siege Rhino on top. See if maybe he stops Thompson in the upkeep. And he will, so now he's going to go after Courser. This is one of the situations that you talked about too, where are you supposed to Murderous Cut on the draw step, or are you just supposed to Murderous Cut right now? Do you want to let him know there's a Siege Rhino on top of his deck?
Yeah, I mean, what are you really going to do different? And Gerry, on the other hand, has things like, for instance, he has a Ajani, and now he knows that for sure Ajani will hit.
Yep. And there's the Rhino. Here's an attack for 1. And now Sansep Citadel's going to come into play and pass the turn back. Kastel's going to untap. He will draw. Utter End is what he's found.
Now, the problem that we have is that every turn Kastel's trying to answer what Gerry did, but Gerry's already so far ahead. Gerry's got a much better mix of mana. Gerry's putting some pressure on him. And some of Gerry's proactive cards, like Ajani, are doing something positive, and then even when Chad gets rid of them, he's ahead. Like in this case, he's up a Siege Rhino.
Kastel going to sacrifice the Windswept Teeth.
Kastel has a Hornet Queen, however, so if he can get 2 more land in play, he actually has chances of doing something big enough that it can turn things around.
Yeah, you can tell what he's working towards now. You know, given that he hasn't done anything in the opening turns of the game, you know, his hand is, while we haven't seen it via Thoughtseize or anything, it's pretty clear what he's up to, which is I need to work my way towards Hornet Queen. That's kind of my big plan in this entire game, and hopefully it works out. You see Utter End take care of a Johnny there, but no 6th land there for Chad, so he just has to pass the turn back over to Thompson. Thompson's draw was a copy of Doomwake Giant. That'll mess up the Hornet Queen plan.
Absolutely.
There's Siege Rhino.
Gerry relentlessly keeping the pressure on.
That's a Murderous Cut.
Now, this is actually a really key play for Chad. The ability to make 2 big plays in 1 turn. He finally has a little bit of breathing room. Now Chad can actually do something proactive on his own if he can find any kind of a threat. Whether it's dropping a whip right now, a Siege Rhino of his own. This is his opening. He bought himself an extra turn of tempo. What can he do with it?
Well, he's reaching for mana, so it looks like he's got something to do. The problem here for him, you take a look at that mana base. Painful.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why we talked about a few turns ago when he was at 20, you know, throwing away an extra life was a little bit risky. You know, it's nice to have the option to shuffle later, but when you have that many pain lands, you got to imagine that someday you're going to have to pay the piper.
Utter End is the top card of the deck now. This is for the Scry for Temple of Silence. Does he want to let that go or keep it? It looks like he wants to keep it. You see Thompson's hand is Hero's Downfall, which he's casting. The last card is Doomwake Giant. We'll see what his draw step is.
Unfortunately for Chad, Gerry was able to regain that tempo back just as fast as Chad took it.
Satyr Wayfinder is going to come across here. Now, the question is, does Thompson want to cast a Doomwake Giant? The answer is yes, he will. So that's going to come down.
Oh, this was really important. This is Thompson's last card.
Yep.
Now Chad can actually drop a Hornet Queen and have chances of it living.
Yeah, the big question is, does he have a land in his hand? It looks like he actually has a copy of Windswept Teeth.
Yeah, this was big. This is actually Chad's opening. As long as Gerry doesn't draw a Courser of Crowfix or an Eidolon or another Doomwake Giant or a Whip, some kind of an enchantment, Kastel actually has something good going for him. Now, his life total is going to be low enough that everything's going to fall apart if Thompson finds even a single enchantment. However, at least he has a plan.
You see him taking a look at the cards in his hand. That is a Windswept Heath. This does not look to be Hornet Queen. Pharika.
Interesting. So he decides to go with Pharika first, not wanting to risk Doomwake Giant triggering. The nice thing about Pharika here is that the death touch creature can be made in combat, potentially blocking the Doomway Giant.
Yep.
So maybe this is just the more conservative line.
He does have a creature down there in the bin in Courser of Krufix.
But just the one, meaning that if Thompson attacks with Satyr Wayfinder, he's going to be forced to make a tough decision. Does he block with the Wayfinder and potentially not have the ability to fight Doomway Giant?
And he takes one very quickly. He's down to 7. Thompson's draw for the turn was a copy of Doomway Giant. Curious to see if he wants to sandbag that one or just play that one as well.
That's big. The fact that if Kastel had played the Hornet Queen, he would have lost everything.
Yep. Forest is what he's searching up. He's down to 6. I wouldn't be surprised to see Chad fire off the other end on the Doomway Giant. Now he'll have to take 1 to do so, so he's going to go down to 5. So there that goes. Take a draw for the turn in just a moment. He wants to take a look at Thompson's resources in his graveyard. Now it's time.
And he takes another damage from his lands, putting him at 4.
Trigger, here come the bees.
Hornet Queen, such a good source of devotion, means that most of Chad's draws are going to be enough to wake Farika up.
Thompson's draw for the turn was a pretty good one.
Wow.
It was a copy of Farika, so he's going to be able to play this and that. That's 2 spells in one turn. Clear both of those out and get in for a point of damage.
Absolutely huge.
Now, Devotion isn't on for Farika, but the ability to keep triggering Doomwake Giant is.
Yeah, and Thompson's going to make an army pretty quickly here. It's going to be very difficult for Chad to come back here. He needs to get the Doomway Giant off the table and play his own Hornet Queen. Alternatively, he can just try to rely on this Farika, but the problem is that Thompson's Farika has a lot more fuel.
Farika may have been the best draw on the deck that turn.
Oh yeah, I think it is without question.
That's a huge draw.
Yeah, because even like Whip of Erebos would have cost too much to make 2 big plays in one turn.
Yeah, now you can see Chad kind of sweating it now. He was in a pretty good spot when he played that Hornet Queen. We saw Thompson's hand. He just had a copy of Doomwake Giant over there, but Farika being the draw step let him play 2 spells in one turn, and Farika's text has a huge implication on this game. The ability to make those enchantment creatures to trigger Doomwake Giant, that even the play that you mentioned, which is making a blocker inside of combat.
Yep.
Where you can't trigger Doomwake Giant, well, Farika blows that up too.
Yep, Farika means that Thompson has access to instant speed enchantment creatures at will.
Don't get a great look at Gerry's draw. I'm not entirely sure how much it matters, though, what the top card of the deck is. He might have what he needs to win the game in play. Here comes Doomwake, along with Satyr Wayfinder. Clear for takeoff. Kastel looks like he's going to activate his Farika here.
I mean, he needs to. This is his only chance, hoping that Thompson misses it. But Thompson's not going to. He's a seasoned veteran.
It seems unlikely that he would miss this. He's going to remove a Courser of Krufix to make a creature. Gerry says, I'll activate my Farika. I'll make a creature as well. Remove my Courser of Krufix. Trigger my Doomwake Giant. Kastel with perhaps a response here. He's going to Hero's Downfall that with the Farika activation on the stack. He says, well, I'm going to activate Farika again. So we got a nice little stack here building. Gerry going to remove Eidolon of Blossoms, and that is going to do it.
The hand.
Gerry Thompson going to win this match here over Chad Kastel in the Abzan Reanimator Mirror. Excuse me. They're playing 74 of the same 75, but Gerry Thompson gets the job done. He moves on to 7-2.